This would be much more powerful if the camera had just come on, but you've been watching me noodle around for a second. But regardless, apreciados amigos y amigas, que alegría que estemos todos juntos aquí en la Iglesia de Todos los Santos. Dear friends, what a joy it is that we're together here at All Saints Church this morning. Mi nombre es Mike Kinman. My name is Mike Kinman, soy Rector. I am the Rector, pronombre él. My pronouns are he, him. Great stuff happening this morning. I can't wait to get to our forum. I'm so excited about the guests that we have and the conversation we're going to have. Want to just update a couple things. Looking at the text from Erica Tamblin. We did our food table, which we give out $10 Ralph gift cards in the morning at All Saints Church to people who are food insecure, who are living in and around this area. We gave out 212 of the $10 food cards and 135 masks this morning. So thank you for the people who have been dropping those by. If you want to donate those, you can mail them to the church at 132 North Euclid, or if you're already out already, you can drop them to the mail slot by the door facing the quad lawn. Now, some of you driving by the church this week noticed on middle of the week some caution tape up on campus and people no longer staying there. That's just because we had the exterior of the campus cleaned to get ready for the Red Cross blood drive on Friday, which was great. And so the folks who'd been living there shifted to the parking lot in the south side of the church. Some of these members of our community are still staying there. Some are back on the central part of campus. We've been working with them as a community and with people from Union Station Homeless Services to make the campus as safe and welcoming as possible for everyone. We're also continuing to work with with LASA and with Union Station to move people into housing, and we had one more person moved into a hotel this week, so that's really exciting. We're also continuing to live in solidarity with Learning Works Charter School, which, as you know, is an amazing community of teen scholars who are escaping from gang life, homeless, teen parents, pregnant teens living in group homes. The Learning Works season, the school year, is coming to an end this week. The food pantry is going to keep going. So if you go shopping, if you can pick up non-perishable food items, diapers, wipes, formula, drop them off at Learning Works, 90 North Daisy, Monday through Friday between 10 and 4. Every week we have a Partner in Love, who is a nonprofit organization in Pasadena doing amazing work for the community. This week's Partner in Love is Black Lives Matter Pasadena and the incredible work that Jasmine Richards is doing. Now, Black Lives Matter Pasadena doesn't have a way to donate to them directly. So we've been talking, and instead we're raising money to buy portable sound equipment because the actions that they're doing are getting so large that their sound equipment isn't adequate. So we're getting stuff that's portable, that's really loud, that's Bluetooth capable. And so what's going in the chat right now is how you can give, which is you go to the All Saints donate site, you click on make a one-time gift, and then under special gift notes, put BLM Pasadena Sound. And we'll do that, and we'll get great sound equipment for Jasmine and for Andre and Black Lives Matter Pasadena. Also want to let you know the Racial Justice Ministry is having a talking and listening session on Sunday, June 14th. How does the murder of George Floyd affect your family or community? Where do we go from here? Information about that is in the chat. We are still on a staying at home order. And we also recognize that home is not a safe place for everyone. And so if it's not a safe place for you, please let us know. And then we're also putting some resources in the chat feature. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is there. You can also text LOVE IS to 22522 or log on to thehotline.org. We're also putting information about the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is an amazing organization for LGBTQ youth. If you're not feeling safe or you just need someone to talk to, call the Trevor Project, and that number is in the chat. So we're calling this forum 6 Summers Later, What Has Changed, What Hasn't, and where do we go from here? And 6 summers ago, Michael Brown was murdered on the streets of Ferguson, and an uprising happened that it didn't start things. Things have been going for a long time, but it was one of the first times that the issue of police violence went national and global, and Ferguson was the epicenter of that. And today, bringing together 3 just dear friends who were really amazing parts of it on the ground, having different roles in Ferguson. And I want to introduce the 3 of them to you. First, Reena, Hajat, Carroll. Reena is the executive director of the California Conference for Equality and Justice, which fights to eliminate bias, bigotry, and racism. She spent 15 years in St. Louis launching diversity and inclusion programs including the well-known and respected Listen, Talk, Learn community dialogue program after Michael Brown's murder in Ferguson. She relocated here to LA 3 years ago with her partner and 2 kids. And that's been great because she's done intermittent work with our congregation and staff, particularly leading a listening session after Charlottesville. Lisa Sharon Harper. Lisa, I didn't check my email, so I'm just going to go with what I got off your website. Lisa is a speaker, writer, and activist. She's the founder and president of freedomroad.us, a consulting group dedicated to shrinking the narrative gap in our nation by designing forums and experiences that bring common understanding, common commitment, and common action. She's the author of a whole mess of really amazing books. Most recently, The Very Good Gospel, How Everything Wrong Can Be Made Right, which explores God's intent for the wholeness of all relationships in the light of today's headlines. Lisa, do you want to add anything else since I forgot to read what you sent me?
That's actually what I sent you.
Oh, great. We're on the same, we're right there together.
Yeah.
And then finally, Alexis Templeton. Now I'm going to read you what Alexis sent me for Alexis's bio. Alexis Templeton is a 26-year-old former Ferguson activist. Alexis co-founded Millennial Activists United, a prominent grassroots organization that worked to empower Black youth, Black women, and Black queer people in the fight for Black liberation during the Ferguson uprising. Templeton is an alumnus of Washington University. I'm going to add that Alexis is one of the bravest people and one of the most powerful leaders I've ever met. If you want to know why we have millions of people in the streets right now chanting Black Lives Matter, it's because leaders like Alexis and many others were out there 6 years ago. Only then they were mostly by themselves and they were being spat on and abused and arrested night after night after night. So Alexis, I not only want to welcome you, I want to say thank you because it's because of you that this is happening right now. So just
I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a big responsibility. Thank you.
Well, you know what? And I'm glad. And so, you know, the responsibility is on all of us right now. But
absolutely.
You guys, as you said, you know, Michael Brown was the spark and you all lit the fire. So right now, I just want to open it up for each of you just to jump in, whoever wants to go first, and just say whatever is on your heart right now, as much as you feel like or want to, and feel safe. It's so good to have all you here. So who wants to jump in?
Well, I want to defer to Alexis. I think Alexis needs to get that first word, because seriously.
Okay.
Yeah, go for it, Alexis.
For sure. You know, when you first started talking, Mike, you mentioned how Ferguson did not start things because there's always been liberation movements. Mm-hmm. You know, Black people have always been doing the work. And I think that was something that I had to learn as I went through school. And I was like, okay, now I see why people say that, you know, but I really like to make it clear for folks that, you know, Ferguson has changed really how we have conversation in the world because we had no choice. You know, it was everywhere you turned. It was on your social media. It was on your TV. It was nothing you could ignore. And, you know, Ferguson just really put that mirror of systematic oppression up to the world, put the mirror up to the world for them to see. And now this moment with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade have really, you know, pushed people to take what they saw in Ferguson and reciprocate. And here we are. And so I really like to give shout out to all the Ferguson activists that were in that uprising that put their bodies on the line. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Yeah, shout out to those people. Shout out to those people for sure.
Amen. I'll follow that. I feel like I honestly have a debt of gratitude to Alexis and to all of the organizers in Ferguson. When I first started to think about going and you know, just leveraging whatever I have in order to help, I really didn't know how to go in. I didn't know anyone. I wasn't, I think I had been to St. Louis one time and I knew that was not the way to enter. You don't enter helping if you don't know anybody. So I started to call around, and the thing that I started to realize also as people like Alexis were marching on West Florissant in circles, you know, and the night before, well, the night that all the tear gas started to flow. And by the way, we had not seen tear gas used in a protest up to that point until Ferguson. Like I had not experienced that, at least not since the 1960s. So in my lifetime, we had not experienced the whole tear gas thing, maybe in the 70s, in the early 70s around Vietnam. But that was a whole new thing. And now it's a tactic, a known tactic, and it feels normative, but it was not normative then. and with the tanks in the streets and all of that, I just got a real sense that there needs to be a bridge here, because I could see that most of the people who were marching in circles were Black. And I looked at the demographics in the surrounding areas, and the surrounding areas were mostly white. So I was like, why aren't the white folks marching too? And that is my call. My call is to be a bridge person. So that's how I went in, is actually to help build that bridge. So actually, Mike, you were literally one of the first people that I talked to at all, and helped to connect me. PICO actually is the entity that brought me in and housed me during that week. And so great debt to Mike McBride and to that crew. But what ended up happening was the group that surfaced out of that was Faith for Justice, which is still working and doing amazing work today. And over the course of that week, I met incredible people like Tracy Blackman, who just, with the most genuine, authentic, rooted grit of faith, was engaging the powers in this struggle. And I believe what I saw there was that it was the power of their faith. Even people who did not proclaim faith were exercising faith. Go into to confront the powers. Alexis, I'll never in my whole life forget watching you literally rattle the cages, like rattle the barriers at the city hall where you guys were staging an action. And I had brought faith leaders to come and exercise solidarity. I just never seen anything like that before. In that image of you rattling that cage, that is literally the image that I think of every time I think we must engage. It's you rattling the cage, saying no, because I think it's you, it's your generation, it's the Black Lives Matter movement, it's the Ferguson Hands Up, Don't Shoot movement that really taught us Gen Xers, who had gone pretty much a whole generation with only the civil unrest of Los Angeles, but not Ferguson up to that point. And you taught us to say no. You taught us to say no more. No, we're not doing it. We're not doing this anymore. No. So I want to say thank you for that. And I think that is probably the most important thing that I learned there, was that we don't have to stay silent and we don't have to accept injustice.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Reena, jump in. What's on your heart right now?
Yeah, happy to. Good morning, everybody. And Lisa, thank you for that, because that is certainly where my mind went in terms of, Alexis, seeing you reminds me 6 years ago of a couple key events. One was around the event that Cornel West was at. It was at that big blues stadium. I'm forgetting the name of that stadium now.
The Shafet Center,
The Shafet Center. And I remember that Shafet Center was full of people, and the young activist got on stage and said, we don't care about what you're talking about right now, because you all have been saying this for so many decades and nothing's changed. And it went from that to Harris Stowe, where people were trying to do, I remember that particular event, a really nice agenda planned event. And it was supposed to be very just calm and official and formal. And again, you all said, no, we're not doing that. And that continued. And what I loved about that, and Alexis, about how you all handled all of those conversations and those kind of uprisings, it was saying to all of the more seasoned leaders and the people who were really kind of ready to protest and to be involved with change, but not in the way you all were saying. What you said is, we have strategy, we know what we're doing, and listen to us. And I think had you all not done that and shown people that you were serious about what you were talking about, and you were going to organize, you were going to be effective, I don't think we'd be where we are today. So thank you for those few events that got into people's head that you're not going to stop, and you're not going to just do business as usual, and you're not just going to follow the agenda, and you're not just going to sit back when someone says, yeah, we want change, we're working on it, look at all the progress we've made, we have a civil rights office now, we have a diversity director now. You all were saying that's not what we're talking about, and that's not what this is about. And I think, again, had you not done that, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you so much for thank you, Brittany, Teff, all of you all who were in that together. And again, very organized, really strategic. This was not, and I remember the chatter around, these are just kids. They're just mad. They just need to go sit down somewhere. That was not what was happening. So that's on my heart right now. So again, just thank you.
Yeah. No, one of the things I remember Teff saying was like, someone said, "What's your plan?" And he's like, "Damn, this didn't come with no brochure." You know, it was just like, you know, we're making this up. And so, like, Alexis, I want to go back to you. And so it's been 6 years, and I'm interested, like, you're watching what's happening now. You're part of what's happening now. How do you see what's happening now? How would you describe what's happening now and how we got here? What does it look like to you?
Sure. Yeah, I want to preface it by saying that, you know, I watch all the lives. I don't go out in the day, but I do come out at night. And I was really intentional about making that decision, because I think that during the day, the police have learned that they have to also be strategic as well. You know, while organizers are being strategic and looking for ways to disrupt, the police have learned that in the public eye, or when the world may or may not all be watching, you know, that they have to perform in a certain way. And so they want to be helpful to protesters. They want to help you shut down the highway. They want to shut down the streets you want to march down, so that they can also look like, or they can also look like they are participating in I guess in joining protesters, by giving them that extra help. So that's my preface. But at night, you know, things look really different. That's when you see a lot of tear gas. You know what I'm saying? That's when you hear about violence. And it's because that's when violence occurs at night. Yeah. And so I was really intentional about going outside at night and seeing just exactly how the police were truly handling the situation. And that is the same. That is very much the same. I think how they handle things very, very much looks the same. Riot gear, the mace, the pepper sprays. I think now they have pepper balls, and that's interesting. And you know, and people, it's watching, you know, our old organizers, old people that were out, former Ferguson activists, rather, not older people. I think that's how we've all started to refer to each other now. But like, you know, former Ferguson activists that are now leading it, you know, your Expect Us group. That's what they're called here, is Expect Us. And how they're turning up looks very different from the new folks who are just getting involved. You know, they're coming to the bigger protests, they're learning and seeing, and they're taking it back, and they're holding their own protests. These young folks, you know, there was a protest on Lindbergh in St. Louis, by the Florissant that went to the Florissant Police Department, which is about 5 minutes from Ferguson. I know you all are in California. And they marched there. And it was not led by Expect Us folks. It was led by some young people I had never seen before. And I'm like, that's what's up. You know, that's why we did this, so that other people can start using their voice and figuring out the game and how to do this protest stuff on their own. And so that's what's new, is that there are new faces. And that feels really, really good to see.
Yeah. I just add to that, or well, not add, but just another thought is that I've heard a lot on the news today, a question about whether or not this is a moment or a movement. That's like the big question in the air. And all I could think is, of course this is a movement. This is a movement because this is not happening out of nothing. This is actually literally happening out of 5 years of organizing. Since 6 years of organizing, since Michael Brown's death, really even 7 if you go back to Trayvon Martin.
Trayvon, yeah.
But right, so there's been a lot of organizing. And yes, it went underground after maybe 2 years of the Ferguson uprising and all the rest, all the hashtags, but it didn't stop. So what is happening now with like millions of people coming out all over the world does not happen out of the blue. That happens because of organizing and because of movement. The Black Lives Matter leaders, including Alexis, I believe, and then also others, have been traveling all over the world telling their story. I know because I've crisscrossed with them at different points. And so the reason you have a Black Lives Matter movement rising up in Australia right now is because Black Lives Matter activists went and spoke to the Aboriginals in Australia, and the same in Brazil. So this is not a moment. This is a movement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree there. I think that you've seen a lot of sustainability to keep the conversation on race happening. Watching folks do different things, watching folks run to be elected officials. You know what I'm saying? There's so many folks in St. Louis in particular that are Ferguson activists that have really stepped into the political game and are big prominent faces here now, and that's really important. You know, we didn't have that in 2014, so I agree. I agree, Lisa, for sure. There has been tons and tons of organizing that have contributed to this moment as well, especially including in places like Minnesota. They were organizing in 2014 as well. So many of the Minnesota crew came to St. Louis and Ferguson and took what they saw here back home, and that's important.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm interested in what you see sort of right now. It's much more on a massive scale. I mean, we see not just in the U.S., but we see sort of global, protests that are happening. And where do you see, first of all, is this a tipping point? And secondly, what has happened, organizing is a huge piece of it. But it feels like there's something in the public consciousness that has taken a next step. There's a long way to go. I mean, right now people are saying stuff which is really different than doing stuff. But what has happened over the last 5-6 years that has, I mean, really quickly, within a week, we have these solidarity demonstrations everywhere, and it's huge numbers of people. They've gone mainstream in a really different way. So, what's happening? And then, is there a different tenor that you're noticing? Like, what are you noticing?
I think it is. So I think that George Floyd is the tipping point. Mm-hmm. I think that Mike Brown was a tipping point. And I think so Mike Brown was a tipping point, right? And then for 6 years now, you see that tipping point building back up. And then George Floyd happens. And then people learn about Breonna Taylor. And so George Floyd is one tipping point. And then Breonna Taylor just adds that fuel. You know what I'm saying? Folks keep dying. Folks have not stopped dying in the 6 years that things have been quiet, and there have not been uprisings like we saw in Minnesota that sparked uprising elsewhere, but people have still been dying. And those people paid attention to those stories. And I think, we hear George Floyd and it's like, damn, enough is enough. Like, do you get it or do you not? Mm-hmm. Also, like, I was on the phone with my uncle and he was saying, he was talking about how talked to this lady at his job who said, when you hear about people getting shot or you see those videos, it's like a sad way to say it, but it happens, it's sad and it's over. But she's like, but watching that police officer take George Floyd's life, on camera, like that hits different is essentially what she told him. And that's, that people watch the public lynching on mm-hmm. camera. And that's, how do you ignore that and not say that's not right? Mm-hmm. Where do you find the logic in that man's actions that really centers humanity and really centers keeping him safe and keeping him alive, which is essentially his job. So that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah. Reena, I want you to jump in with, because you and I actually, you called me a week or so ago, and it's one of the questions that you asked is, how is this, difference? Like, what's on your heart?
Yeah, so the Friday a week ago, it was watching the news, watching the fires, watching everything happen and evolve as it was. It felt more intense, certainly. But I think in terms of what we're seeing now, so almost 10 days later, is a couple things. One, I think there are more white people involved than ever before. So I think that's great, right? There are more numbers. There are more people being advocates and getting messages out, white people that really understand how important this time is to show up and to have the really difficult conversations in their families, with their friends, to just be in really uncomfortable places. So I think that is a huge difference right now. The other is the corporate piece. We are seeing corporate statements flying around racism, around, not systemic racism, the NFL, retail. All of these companies are kind of now having some position on this. And I think the reason, though, we have to be really, really careful around the corporate piece right now. And I would say I am only cautiously encouraged by this. I think we have to be really real about why these statements are coming out. And my position on it is it's because of property. In 2014, Quick Trip burned. It was one building. Right now, buildings are being destroyed. Merchandise, there's property, there's product for a number of different stores and in communities. And there's a financial piece to that. And so, of course, people are paying attention differently now than they ever would have. Because no one knew about Quick Trip in Ferguson. I mean, they knew it and it made news, but it was one gas station. Now there are so many more. So people are paying attention for different reasons right now, which is why I say I'm encouraged, but cautiously. Because for me, this has to be sustained. Otherwise, a statement is just words. And I'm not really that interested in just a corporate statement. So I think there are a lot of factors for why it's different, but it certainly is different.
Well, so that reminds me of a couple things. First of all, just like I think it was Starsky, it may not have been, I don't want to attribute this to him, but I think it was him who was saying to all these corporations making statements like, that's great, fax me a picture of your executive board and let's see what it looks like. But then also this gets to the whole thing of, what is the value of people versus the value of property? And it's like, if the tipping point is, oh my gosh, property's being damaged and we're losing money. Well, if the tipping point hasn't been, people are getting killed by police.
Yeah.
And what is that saying, about us? I mean, someone just wrote in the chat, which only we can sort of see here as panelists, as violence is not acceptable. And I would say, yeah, I mean, Alexis, when people would ask you in Ferguson, what do you want from the police? You would have a very simple answer, which is stop killing us. And so, yeah, why does it take until, buildings start burning when we start saying violence isn't acceptable? Why haven't we been saying violence isn't acceptable when Black people are getting killed all the time? And so, where is the opportunity now? And I guess this sort of gets into the piece of how do we build a movement to start moving from, we're going to make these statements that really don't require anything from us and that are really sort of self-congratulatory and self-protective, to saying, what does it mean to really value human life more than our money or our property? And Lisa, you're waving your hand, so go ahead.
Yeah, only just because I wanted to go back quickly to the question of what's different, because I think that that'll help inform us also going forward into the what next, or how do we build on this. The reality is that we've had a confluence of clear manifestations of America's racialized hierarchy. We had COVID. And I think we really can't underestimate that 110,000 deaths as of yesterday or 2 days ago, more now, I'm sure, means something. And when 60% of those deaths are people of color, that really means something. And I think people were really grappling with that already. And the fact that Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery happened the week before. So you have very clear layering on of people having to deal with the reality that we have an unjust system. So in the same day when Amy Cooper and George Floyd happened, right, and both are caught on tape, you actually have, I think that's the tipping point, is when we can see it in clear and base relief, basically. And I think that there's also something that can't be underestimated. White people did not just show up. They have been also organized over the last many years, the last several years. And I think there was a tipping point that happened among them the week after George Floyd. I had a conversation with Jen Hatmaker on Facebook Live. We had one that really flubbed. We did IG Live and it was good, but Facebook Live absolutely didn't happen. So we redid it on Monday, 1 week from when George Floyd died. And more than 700,000 people have watched that. And it was, the title of it was White Women's Toxic Tears, and looking at Amy Cooper and what's happening for them. So I think white people are beginning to understand how their own mind has worked around this and how much they don't know. So there are white leaders of European descent, which I like to say, that have already done their homework and are beginning to actually speak out and educate their people. And I think that helps. So now we see a sea of people who were ready for this moment. It's like a Kairos moment, the moment opening. So the question now, as we move forward, I think, Mike, just to begin to respond to your question is, okay, so now what do we do, right? One, we still have to continue to educate, because the vast majority, 90% of the people who are out there marching really still don't understand what's going on. So in order for them to actually become movement people and not just moment people, they have to understand the systemic dynamics going back in the history and then forward. How is what we're seeing right now only really just a new manifestation of slave patrols, right? And then we have to get clear directives, clear demands, clear calls. And that's something that I think we're working out right now. But what can we get built into the Democratic platform, since the Democratic convention is coming up? I am just honestly, personally, I'm Xing out. I'm not even looking at the Republican platform, because they have done absolutely nothing to uphold or to hold Trump accountable for his inaction during COVID, and his inaction here, and his positive action to kill and deport millions of other people. And the third thing is that we have to actually engage. So we have to get stepping. We have to continue to create avenues for people to actually get active, not just to learn, but to do. So I think if we do those three things, we'll be doing really well come November.
Yeah. So Alexis, I actually wanted to kick it back to you for a couple things. First of all, I'm interested in, Reena talked about where she's skeptical. Where are you skeptical and where are you hopeful? And then, Lisa's talking about voting. And I remember when you and Kayla talked to our young folks, our Trouvères, when we did our civil rights tour, and you met with us in Ferguson. You and Kayla were in different places with voting. I mean, Kayla, that's what she does. She organizes that stuff. And you were like, you know what, I'm still not sure about that. So I'd love you to sort of talk about, where are you, first of all, right now, where are you hopeful, where are you skeptical? And the answer, like Andre Henry said this, I don't know if you've met Andre. Andre said this in an action on Thursday. It's like, we always just get told vote like it's the only thing to do. So anyway, I'm interested in sort of like, go. What are your thoughts?
So yeah, I want to affirm some of Lisa's points about, first about what do we do next, and that political education is extremely important. I was out in the streets and I hadn't done much history reading. I read Asada. You read the autobiography of Malcolm X. That's essential reading. Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. I read those books, but I hadn't looked into the history of movements. The feminist movement, even Black liberation movements. How womanism intertwines with feminism. How Black feminism looks different than white feminism. And I really got to dive into that at school, and that reading was important. I'm not saying political education happens just at school at all. I disagree. But political education is extremely important, and I learned so much that I'm able to bring back to this moment in the movement. You know what I'm saying? That is extremely helpful in how I move and how I talk, and even in having this conversation with you guys, I'm able to show up a little differently than I was before. So yes, to political education. The second thing that I wanted that you said was that there needs to be clear demands, and they're out there. They exist. The Movement for Black Lives platform, I believe, has put out demands, and one of their main demands that people have been consistently talking about is defunding the police. And so I think the ask in Ferguson was stop killing us. The statement, rather, it wasn't an ask, it was a statement. This is what's going to happen if you don't stop killing us. And then I think this in this moment here of the movement, I think what it is, you know what I'm saying? Now we want, no more working. We want you defunded. It's time to end the police. You don't know what you're doing, so now you have to go. And so I think that's one of the big demands here. And you said, where am I hopeful and where am I skeptical? I'm hopeful in the organizing. I'm hopeful in the organizing. It doesn't happen without people power. If people stop showing up, and that means in the streets and at the tables, when people stop showing up there is no more moment in the movement. It dwindles down, and people move on. People do different things because it's time, and these are people's lives. You know what I'm saying? People are still living while all this is happening, working, school, etc. And kids even. And so like, I lost my train of thought, but I was sure I was going somewhere. Where I'm hopeful is the organizing, and people being able to stay outside. And if they can't come out, they can't stay outside, then moving it to the tables, and again, Lisa, that political education so that we can keep it pushing. And that's where I jump in about voting, because I think at those organizing tables comes out a lot of policy. And so what Mike is talking about is, I was in a debate with a former comrade about voting, and she's Kayla Reed. You can look her up. She runs Action STL in St. Louis. She's heavy on the voting now. She's like, yo, we also need to vote, like not just on the national level, like locally, especially, you need to be voting. And for me, at that time specifically, it's just a politic that I held on to, that I wouldn't vote. I just never have. I'm 26, so I haven't voted in any of, if I'm at 26 minus 18, I'm sorry, I'm a little terrible at math, but those number of years, I'm not voting. And I still hold that feeling to this day. I guess it is a politic, but it's also a feeling too. I don't have the desire to. And people can make arguments for why you should. And I'm like, yeah, I hear you. And that's really important, but I'm good. I'm good. For me, it's a personal decision. And because I feel like I've done my part. I did my part in 2014. I feel like that took a lot out of me. And so I'm good. I'm completely good on the political sphere. I pay attention to what's going on. I show up for my people. And I think you show up for your people too in the voting booths. And that's just a part of the participation in organizing and taking action that I just refuse to do, and other people can do it, and it's okay. I'm not advocating for people to not vote. I just do not, for me. And so I think Kayla in that debate taught me that. She beat me there. And I had to own that and sit with that. And I have, and so that's what I come up with, is that's just a personal decision for me. But do I think people need to get out in these polls? Absolutely. We absolutely do. There are things locally and nationally that helps take the organizing that's going to happen after this, after this moment, because there will be another one. The police, somebody told me a long time ago that the work doesn't just keep going, but the police help keep it going for you. And they do, because they're not going to stop. And so the next moment, you know what I'm saying, is when we see different policies like we have in this moment. They're just different things that cities have already put in place that they have already, that has made them committed to doing things different with the police when moments like this happen. For example, in Minnesota, the way they're defunding the places and the institutions rather, are defunding from the police in Minnesota is a really important moment right now. Because we did not see that in 2014. That is new, and they did that very quickly, and that was done. You said that somebody said violence is never acceptable, and I just disagree there, because it was because of that violence, quote, the violence of burning buildings, that we start to see these big policy changes very, very quickly, because people want people to be peaceful. They want people to be calm. They want people to just get back to normal life, and you can't right now while this is happening. So that's when we see policy, and I think that's been a really important feature in this moment of the movement.
So we're starting to get some questions, and you can use the Q&A feature for questions. To sort of riff off something that you were just talking about, Richard Hope asks, please help me understand what defund the police means. If we defund the police, what does that look like for any given city or community and public safety? Thanks.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good question. And I'm going to direct you to the Movement for Black Lives. And Mike, you should give out that address. You should distribute that to folks, so folks can understand the political language and what people are exactly asking for. I'm not active, and so I don't want to say something to you that throws off their demand. I want you to go look for yourself. But that is the Movement for Black Lives, is the platform that has put that out. And you see a lot of local organizers all across the world taking on that. Yeah, we need to defund the police. So you will see that language around. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. It's not necessarily a direct answer, but I definitely pointed you in the right place. I hope that helps.
Does anyone else?
I can also share regarding that,
Sure.
Not as an activist, but rather just thinking of it historically and thinking of it theologically, that the when you look at a tree and its fruit, you have to ask, what's the seed? What was the seed that planted this tree? I just posted a piece about this and also did something on IG Live earlier last week. So this is fresh in my mind. But when you look at the seed of our police, what it was slave patrols. So slave patrols were literally the seed of our current day police departments. If you look at the star that our sheriffs wear right now, it's the exact same star that was originally created for the slave patrols. Now, what's a slave patrol? Slave patrols were the owners of plantations as well as overseers. They would band together into a posse in the light of thousands of uprisings that were happening on plantations all over the South. From about the time that the Atlantic slave trade closed and you had this explosion in breeding farms, hello somebody, across the northern South in order to sell people of African descent into the deep South, you had Black folks saying, hell no, I won't go, basically, and you had them leaving and also lighten up the plantation, saying we're getting out of here. And so they created these slave patrols in order to control the movements of people of African descent and to kill them if they committed murders. So the Jim Crow era with the lynchings is really just another iteration of the slave patrol. They used sheriffs, police officers, county prosecutors, everybody was all up in that mess, lynching people with the power of the badge. And then after the passage of the Civil Rights Act, when that became illegal, the police, then it becomes mass incarceration. So they lower the bar of, now you know this from the movie 13th and also from the new Jim Crow, they lower the bar of criminality so that police officers can now exercise the power of the state once again to control and confine Black bodies. So it's really the same thing. What we saw when George Floyd had Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck, as we saw the power of the state on the neck of Black people in the same way that it has been by the same entity that it has been since the advent of slave patrol. So the question really needs to be, if you cannot get new fruit from a tree, that is, if you plant an orange tree, you're never going to get apples. You will get oranges. We planted slave patrols, and that's what we now have. We need a new seed. We need new seed. We can't tinker. We can't prune this. We can't try to graft new stuff in. It's always going to bear the same thing. So the fundamental question is not, should we abolish police or not? The fundamental question is, what do we actually need? We actually need public safety. And public safety encompasses education, housing, transportation, healthcare, jobs. Public safety encompasses all of it, not just white men or Black men or Latino men with guns.
You actually wrote a really great piece that I saw this morning about the new seed. I just put the link in the chat on that. Some other questions are coming in. Let me see. Phoebe says, there was an excellent article in today's New York Times about roadblocks put up by police unions, which are often determined to prevent accountability for cops. Is there work being done about the problem of police unions? I know the police union in St. Louis. The closest thing I've ever done to meeting Bill Connor has been meeting Jeff Rurda, who's the head of the police union in St. Louis. What's being done about police unions?
I think people have been pushing back people have been pushing back against the police union in St. Louis for a long time. Somebody who documents that work really well is Sam Sway on Twitter. He documents like the institution of policing and like what goes on. And so he does research on like the number of internal affairs reports within police departments and breaking that down by incident and things like that. And so that's somewhere to look for that. He does that very well. But with police unions, like people have been pushing and trying to work with police unions for a long time. And that work is always being done because that work is always being done. But now I think that what we see is more on like a more a visible scale of what really happens within police unions and the language. And now folks are like, oh wow, you know, it's another one of those wake up moments. Like, wow, this is really happening. You know what I'm saying? But yes, organizing has been being done with police unions for a while.
I want to add just one
go ahead,
thing.
Reena, jump in.
Yep, sure. So one quick thing about policing, and this in just kind of a mega conversation around policing and police reform. Lisa, to just add one more piece to all of what you just said, I think at the end of the day, what we also have to really try to focus on is relationship. If police don't have, and they are not in relationship with Black and brown communities, if they don't value Black and brown communities, if they have not worked through their internalized bias and even their internalized racism, because let's be clear, Black and brown police have also committed these horrific crimes. So this bias and this racism is not only for one group of people. Certainly we have seen it in patterns over and over again disproportionately, but if you're not in relationship and you don't value Black and brown people, then you are going to continue to commit what we've seen happen.
Yeah, and
I
go ahead.
I also I think but you know, I have very little sympathy there, because I think police have had time to build those relationships, if at least within the last 6 years. You know, like there clearly was a problem called out, and you've had 5 to 6 years to build those relationships and redo policing a bit. Even if it's just putting certain patrolmen that can become familiar with the community inside the community. So they have had 5 to 6 years to do that. And some police departments may have done that. But I think, you know, it's a step beyond relationships. While relationships are important, and I agree with you, I think that, you know, it's like it's a bigger issue than just the relationships that we build, because I believe it's bigger than the relationships. I'm just
you go, Alexis, keep going. You got it.
No, I'm
so
good.
certainly I think divesting is important. I think defunding is important, but I think there is a piece around public safety, Lisa, that you're talking about that is really key. And in that though, even when you have public safety, you can still, when you are dealing with the implicit bias, you can still make choices about who you decide to keep safe and who you don't, if you haven't worked out what's going on in your head and heart about
That's
people
fair.
that look different than you do.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
I would agree with that as well. And I mean, I think that community policing is something that actually does much better than the kind of policing that we've had probably for the last 2 decades, where it's more drive-by policing. So you don't know the community. Everybody then becomes the enemy. But I also want to add to that, this is where that systemic piece gets layered on top of that. Well, it's all systemic, right? Because they made a choice to defund community policing back in the early 2000s and to revoke that, especially in New York City where I was, right? So, but you layer that on top of the militarization of the police, right? So you give people who have no relationship, high levels of bias, tanks, and you can do a lot more damage. Plus, back that up with a union that is going to shield their officers from accountability, and only have themselves keep themselves accountable, then you have all kinds of structures and systems in place that actually then reinforce the ability for officers to operate with bias. So, and without relationship. So it's all, you know, it's all connected.
Well, and this gets to the piece, I mean, sort of it's what you're talking about with the seeds, Lisa, is this something that is reformable?
Yeah.
You know, or do we need to do something different? Because what has happened, I mean, you sort of told the story. Since enslavement, we've adapted. You know, we're smart. We keep adapting.
Yes, you do.
To use Black bodies, to control Black bodies for commercial and personal gain for white people. And
Yes.
we, like every time something changes, we find new ways to do that because we adapt. And you know, like one of the things that I've seen with police, and I'm not in St. Louis anymore, and sort of, you know, shifted around, is, you know, yeah, there may be individuals who are committed to reform, absolutely. But what I've mostly seen in general as police is police departments have gotten smarter. And it's kind of what Alexis was talking about in terms of what happens during the day versus what happens at night. And, people know that, everyone's got a cell phone camera now. And so you can't do the same things that you used to be able to do because people are watching and there'll be repercussions for that. But it doesn't mean that we're not adapting and finding new ways to do them. And so then, we have this real tension, and maybe it's not a binary, maybe it's not one or the other. But I think we really need to wrestle with the fact that you're just talking about, Lisa, which is how much of this actually is reformable. We talk, we talk a really good game as police departments, and these cities. And, Pasadena just passed in April $400,000 for improved surveillance on helicopters. We have people who are homeless living on our church campus. And the city is spending $400,000 on increased surveillance, and they ain't surveilling my neighborhood.
Wow.
So, at what point do we need to talk about how do we do something differently? Got more questions here. I wish we had more than 9 minutes. John Armstrong, were you going to say something, Alexis?
Oh yeah, I'm looking at the chat. I'm sorry,
oh, yeah.
I'm in and out because I'm also looking at the chat.
Yeah, so I mean, just like anything, is there a question in the chat that you want to say and then respond to before I just ask a question?
It's not really a question. Are we talking about actual comments, or are we just going to do questions?
Whatever you want to do. You see something you want to respond to, say it and respond.
Oh, okay. Mara, their last name starts with an S. I don't want to mispronounce your name, but you said white people in St. Louis do not feel safe around Black people. And then further down in the chat, she says those aren't personally their views, but they just want to uplift the voices from the ground rather. And I think we've been saying that in St. Louis for a long time that people don't want to, St. Louis has been segregated for a long time. White flight has been a thing in St. Louis for a long time. Historically, white people in St. Louis do not feel safe around Black people. And yeah, like that's not new. I just like it's rooted in a lot of historical things, but fundamentally it's rooted in racism. And so while that's a voice from the ground, I think there's a conversation to be had there to push back on why don't you feel safe around Black people in St. Louis? What exactly is it? You know what I'm saying? Because especially now when you look at what's happening, if you're looking at the looting and the shooting and the violence, there is not all Black people in those crowds. And so so you have to assess, are you afraid of Black people, or are you afraid? Like, I think there's a lot that needs to be assessed there when we say, when we're looking at we're saying we fear or don't feel safe around an entire race of people, because St. Louis is a big city. It's really segregated by class, even not just race. And so do you not feel safe around the Black people in Ladue? There's a lot of conversations there to be had. And I just wanted to respond to that particularly.
Yeah. And for like Ladue is like, it's a wealthy, it's like, are you not safe around Black people in Beverly Hills? That would be sort of the LA piece of that. So that's good. Not everyone knows Ladue. That's fine.
Yeah, my fault. I didn't make that clear.
That's okay. Reena, actually, I want to touch that to you because this is what you do.
I would go back to Amy Cooper with this, right? With this conversation.
Yes.
So again, and I wish I could be like all in 100% so encouraged and excited by everything that's going on, but I think I've been doing this work too long to say just because you go to a white dialogue group, just because you read, Kendi's book, it doesn't mean that you get it. You can still very well be Amy Cooper. And Alexis, to your point, right? It is about what you said about this panel, this question around why are you scared? So what is going on in your own sort of muscle memory, your associations, your biases, your racism? When are you going to sit and really question that and have conversations with yourself about why are you scared of Black people? What is the narrative that you have been socialized to think for your entire life? And more importantly, what are you going to do to change it? And it is not about coming to this panel today for 60 minutes. It is not about reading one book. It is really years and years of introspection and exposure that's going to change the mindset. I mean, Mike, I know as long as I've known you, you have inserted moments of your recognition of white privilege in almost every single convening I've had with you. It is those types of actions that are going to change, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so this is, if you're going to be in this work, I really, really hope that people are seeking endurance.
Yeah.
Because the moving, the quick, I'm in it now, and I've said my piece, and now I'm done. I don't care for that right now.
Well,
Can I just add
go,
to that?
Go, Lisa. Yeah, please.
Well, I think that because at the heart of what we're talking about here is implicit bias and explicit bias. We're talking about bias, and bias shapes our actions. How we think about people shapes how we do with people. And one thing that we know, especially in terms of, and you hear Brian Stevenson talk about this all the time, that for people of African descent, there's an automatic belief that we are dangerous, that Black equals dangerous.
Oh, yeah.
That comes from the history. It comes from seeing us literally in chains on work farms with overseers and whips, and then being hanged, AKA lynched. All of these things are all the ways that they treated criminals in Europe. So for 300 years, you saw us, 256 years, you saw us in the exact same situation that white prisoners were in Europe. But we didn't do anything to deserve that. We were simply born. That's what we did. We got born. And then we were treated as if we were criminals, but that's how you saw us. Then for 90 years after slavery, we're being lynched. We're being picked up and put in jail just for sitting on a park bench for too long. And now mass incarceration, 1.5 million African-American men are missing from their communities because of being picked up. So of course you see us this isn't, of course, and it's not even a you. 75% of all people who have ever taken that test, regardless of their ethnicity or racial background, see Black people as dangerous, including Black people, because we all have soaked in it for so long. So that's why it's necessary for us to do what is necessary to lower our levels of implicit bias so that we can see each other as human. Because that is what's real, our humanity.
Well, and I want to add a yes and to that, which is, gets back to money. Because an underlying thing of all of this is what capitalism has continued to develop into, which is saying it is okay for some to use the labor of others to generate wealth for themselves. And that's underlying the whole thing.
Yes.
And it's why we care more about property than we care about people. And it's also why looking, like Reena, at what you said, which is like, I think about us as All Saints Church. And we can be the great progressive church, and we can say, like, I can say all the right things. But like, we're in a process right now of looking at our 2021 budget. We're already starting to look at it because of the economy and different things that are happening. And if our budget does not show in a substantially different way that we get this, then we're not any closer to getting this. Because it's about, money, and, we are much more a capitalist economy than we are a democracy in this country. That's what America is. And we value things by money. And we value, people by how much they can produce. And we have no problem using people to produce money if that's in our power. So really what I'm looking for is, and where my hope is, okay, there's a step of corporations and businesses and churches and saying out there, getting to say Black Lives Matter and write that in the street of Washington. I think that's really cool. And show me with the money, because money is where things, show me the money. Money is where things get valued here. And that's like, I'm looking right in the mirror at me personally and us at All Saints Church, and so I hope, like, All Saints folks, we need to hold each other accountable at our church. Where's the money? Show me the money that we are putting towards this, because that's how we value stuff. We got like 1 minute. I'm hoping Kelly Aaron will be just a little patient. I just want to give it a chance for, maybe I'm just going to go sort of left to right, because I also want to give Alexis the last word. Reena, Lisa, and Alexis, just anything you want to sort of leave us with. And then there's tons of questions left in the Q&A if you want to sort of answer them offline. But we just need to have you back because this is too much. Just thank you. So Reena, anything you want to sort of leave us with?
Sure, really quick, just thank you. I'm kind of looking at the chat too. Thank you for all the admissions on here around I thought I was liberal, I thought I was progressive, and I would just say to all of you, just stay with that, sit with that, and really think through what does that mean and how are you willing to show up differently than you ever had in this moment right now so that it is a sustained movement.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
I would just add to that. I just wanted to give a shout out to all the people who are actually doing that work of bridge building, of actually helping people to do that educational work, and not just educating your mind, but changing your mind, changing your thought processes about people. Latasha Morrison with Be the Bridge, Robin Henderson Espinosa with Activist Theology, Freedom Road. We have amazing opportunities to go deeper on this. There are other, it's out there. It's out there. Rachel Cargill, who is on Instagram and educating the world on this. So there's no excuse anymore. It's out there.
Right, thank you. And Alexis.
Yeah, I guess there's a question. I'll let that be the last word. From an anonymous attendee, and they said, I am a 68-year-old white senior who wants to help but doesn't feel comfortable in protesting now because of the virus. I'm on a fixed income, so I don't have a lot of money to give. How can I help? And so I think that is a very fundamental question, not a basic question. Sorry, that's bad language, but it's a very fundamental question for all folks who are just figuring out if they want to step into this work and if they should step into this work. And so I think those are the people that I would always want to start with. And so for this anonymous attendee, I think you take the time to read, because we all in the house, we got a lot of time to read, whether that's online, whether that's by looking at some books, you know what I'm saying? Whatever, however, paying attention and reading things, and really like forming your own opinions and developing your own where you stand politically is really important. And so I want folks to start there and center there. You know, what do you really believe about this moment, and really working through if that's problematic or not. Really being honest with yourself, and then really working through the problematic aspects of your politics. And really figuring out where you stand and taking a side. I think in 2014, people were forced to pick a side. And so I think that's why you see corporations in support, or they just quietly don't, you know what I'm saying? But the ones that do support are saying it out loud, because I think one of the big things we learned from Mike Brown was, what side are you on? Mm-hmm. People ask that often. And now I think we're getting answers with this moment, with this moment in George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade. And so, now you figured out that side, really stand rooted in those politics, unlearn and argue with yourself, really, really, really get to the bottom of where you stand, and pay attention, keep paying attention.
Thank you. And thank you. You all have been a gift to us this morning. And thank you for the cost that it takes to come and just be as vulnerable as you are. And I hope we can have you back sometime. And it's just, man, it is so good to see all of you. I miss you all so much. So love, love, love. Thank you so much.